the overall political picture and the political dimension. And in the second part, we will discuss first with Riccardo Giucci from the Berlin economic team, and then with the three managing directors of the German Business Association, the economic and business perspective for the three countries. So with that, I will stop my very short introduction and look at Stefan Kegebein if Mr. Richter is already with us, so we can give the floor to him.
Try it and try to give the password to Ambassador Richter in Yerevan and hope that he can switch on the camera and his audio. So let's try it. Mr. Richter, do you hear us and could you see us? So we could not. We see you that you are participant, that you are muted, but we can't hear you. So I would suggest, since there's been some technical problems, that we start with or go further with Ambassador Knirsch from Tbilisi until we have solved the technical problems with Yerevan. So Mr. Ambassador Knirsch, if you don't mind, I would like to pass the floor to you.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Kegebein. Hello, Mr. Harms. Good to see you all again, and I'm very happy to participate in this conference. It is.
If I may shortly interrupt, Mr. Knirsch, I just only can see a dark quadrant of your picture. Is it only with me?
No, it's with all of us.
Maybe you can switch once your camera off and on.
Okay.
Just technically that we can see you. We can hear you properly?
Yeah, we can perfectly hear you, but
now. Okay.
Can you see me now? Okay,
yeah,
good.
Yeah.
Yes, I could see myself all the time, so I wasn't sure. Good. Well, it's very necessary to discuss the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on this region, of course, and what we might be able to do. Mr. Harms already said there may be opportunities in crisis, and it's not cynical at all to speak about that because economic damage comes by itself and resilience has to be created by creativity, by good reactions, and I think such communication can play a role in it. Georgia has had a very good start into the year economically, a good end of last year. We had a very strong recovery from the COVID crisis. And of course, now we feel consequences of the Russia-Ukraine war. I would, in two words, I would describe them as serious but limited. We will hear more from the German economic team on the exact macroeconomic estimations later. But of course, we have some contractionary effects. Georgian exports to Russia will be affected. Businesses such as wine and mineral waters are strongly oriented towards Russia. We will see what the effect will be on remittances from Russia. And a very interesting question is tourism. Maybe classical tourism from Russia will decline or it will not recover from its COVID crisis level. But on the other hand, we are seeing a strong influx of Russians to Georgia, who are maybe some of them are longer-term tourists, and some of them we have to call refugees, a new type of influx. Also, a very high number of creations of new businesses. Many of the Russians coming to Georgia do establish their businesses. This is very simple and goes very quickly in Georgia, and seems to be also a way to transfer capital from Russia to Georgia. And some of the new arrivals are obviously interested in starting a new business, new existence here in Georgia. Many of them come from the IT sector in Russia. We feel this strongly, but there are people from many walks of life, journalists, scientists, all sorts of people actually. The most serious consequences for Georgia probably could lie in on the inflationary side. Inflation is already quite high, and the recovery out of the COVID situation was associated with higher inflation, above 10%. So now it's rising again, driven mainly by the energy prices. Prices of gasoline have increased. Of course, this has effects for the entire economy. Prices in the construction sector, which is important, have increased. And we're still waiting for a price rise with respect to wheat. So far, it has not happened dramatically, and the situation, the supply situation is still pretty good. Now, where could the opportunities lie? Of course, we look at the role of Georgia and of the South Caucasus more generally in terms of transport. The middle transport corridor, or sometimes called the Trans-Caspian corridor, was always an important topic in discussions in the past years. Many elements of it were discussed. There's a lot of cooperation. There are many high-level meetings between the countries, from Turkey stretching over Georgia, Azerbaijan, sometimes including Armenia, sometimes not, towards Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. We now see that these efforts have not produced very great results so far. The Georgian transport sector is telling us that they get a very concrete rise. They see a very concrete rise in demand, more than a doubling of the demand for their transport services. But the infrastructure is not prepared. There is some spare capacity in Georgian ports, perhaps also in the railway, but it is a limited amount of spare capacity. And the most surprising thing to us when we discussed with the transport sector, including, let me say, Georgian Railway, was their view that this conflict would be limited in time. So they are saying, well, yes, it's more demand for us. This is basically good. This could be a boost to the middle transport corridor, but unfortunately, it will be a short conflict. Fortunately for the people, fortunately for the political situation in Europe, but this is not a situation in which we can turn to greater investment into accelerating work on infrastructure, because it will be over soon. I really took issue with that point. I don't see it that way, and I think we should be prepared for a longer conflict. Maybe this consciousness will grow stronger in the coming weeks and months. And I think it was anyway a long-term perspective to strengthen transport infrastructure in the South Caucasus, and now is really the time to do it. Work is progressing on the East-West highway in Georgia, but it is not finished. Work is very far advanced on the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway line, which could be important, but it is not fully completed, and it's running only at very limited capacity so far. And sadly, supply problems concerning many goods make it difficult for an actor like Georgian Railways to enhance their capacity in the short term. So we were told, even if it's only about spare parts for locomotives, so as to be able to deploy more locomotives in Georgia, it is now more difficult than ever to get these spare parts. And it can take months even to get some parts. So any perspective of concluding an infrastructure project more speedily is really very far off. The same is probably true for ferry connections across the Black Sea. This is something that is very much needed for Georgia, for a better connection to the EU, better ability to make use of the deep and comprehensive free trade area. Work is underway the European Commission has become interested and is being engaged now, but I'm afraid that this will also take some time. So much to the transport side of things. Another side, of course, is near sourcing, and Georgia is ready for near sourcing. It provides pretty good opportunities. If you take into account limitations in the availability of trained workforce, Georgia can be a good place, and we see some movements, indications of interests of people who are coming from Moscow and want to set up here in Tbilisi. Also, Mr. Harms, you mentioned the presence of Russian IT specialists. Indeed, this could be an opportunity for the Georgian economy, and the IT network in this region could, the IT business network could change and enlarge. So far, I'm not sure that it is happening. The new arrivals from Russia established themselves in Tbilisi. They can be seen in the cafes with their laptops, doing work, communicating with each other. But so far, I don't see that they come really to the point of establishing businesses or getting interconnected with the Georgian business scene. This is something I'm still waiting for, and it could be a much needed boost to the Georgian IT sector. So much from me. I look forward to hearing from others, hearing questions and participating in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I would suggest that we are going further with Ambassador Richter and afterwards with Mr. Kinder from Chisinau. And then we have, after these contributions, some time for questions. So to the audience, if you have a question, please post it to the chat. So we will take it later to the discussion. Thank you very much. First, Mr. Ambassador, we try our next trial to try to get Mr. Richter into the discussion. Ambassador Richter.
Yes, hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for the delay with the IT technique, but at least I managed to install it on my mobile phone. So good morning to everybody.
Now we can hear and see you, so that's the good news.
That's fine, thank you. So I would like to introduce about the situation here in Armenia. First, I would like to say that Armenia appeared to be a very resilient and quite economically successful country these last years, despite the big crises Armenia had to go through. This was not only the Corona crisis, but also the war 1.5 years ago. And thanks to a very professional macroeconomic policy and reform policy of this government, of the reform government, democratically oriented, so this country presented the best macroeconomic data last year, also compared with other CIS countries, so which is quite impressive. GDP growth, inflation, budget policy, and so on, and still this picture is true, and the government here is quite proud of this, and also the central bank. And this is also being honored by our German organizations, which are active here, for example, KfW, which is continuing to grant loans, and could be interesting also for German companies. So I would like to confirm the impression, so in the outlet you sent around yesterday, how Armenia went through these last months, so and the effects of the Ukraine war. So the impact, or the negative impact so far, is not so serious. So could be assessed as moderate. So we still plan with a small growth of GDP. We have a slowdown of remittances from Armenian migrant workers in Russia, but this number, so it's around 2.8%, as you wrote, is not being regarded as critical for Armenia, because the portion of the remittances in the GDP of Armenia is not so big, so it went down probably from 9 now to 6%, and it's not so serious. The inflation, yes, there is a slight rise of inflation. Also, of course, food prices. But as a whole, economists here assess, but not only here in Armenia, but also of the FAO, assess that there will be no food crisis in Armenia. So Armenians, they can assure the supply of food here. Here in Armenia, despite the shortage which can be expected in some items like wheat and vegetable oil and so on. So regarding economic relations of Germany, on the role of Germany, so we can say that Germany is playing over the last years and also decades a very important role here as a partner in the development cooperation and financial cooperation. The KfW had the huge portfolio of loans granted. So it's around 1.3 billion euro, which is more or less so more than 10% of the GDP. And KfW, I think the representatives of KfW can confirm it, look quite positive on this country as partner and are willing to continue cooperation. The same means GIZ, which has also very good cooperation these last years, is involved in many reform areas, reform of judicial system, small and medium enterprises, tourism, and we can continue this list. The problem is that there was a decision by the old German government, the Ministry of Economic Cooperation, to suspend the transformation cooperation with at least with Armenia, probably also other countries in the South Caucasus, and this is perceived quite negatively here. So I know that there is an effort in the new government now to reverse this decision, but still this is there is no final decision made yet. But this would be, of course, very important for the image of this country and also for our cooperation, for our support in the reform process. The same issues that I named right now, because this, of course, the development of this country, democratic track, and with the rule of law would be, of course, a good precondition also for the investment climate and also for possible investors from Germany. So that's why we are trying hard to get GIZ back to this country, or to assure the continuation of the presence of GIZ here after the year 2023. So another important factor here is the crisis, also the conflict with the neighbor Azerbaijan, and also the tense situation with Turkey. Of course, the ongoing conflict is not a good precondition for investors. That's why this is also perceived correctly by this government, and I would like to say that Armenia is trying hard to take a constructive and very pragmatic position in resolving this crisis. It is entering in peace negotiations with Azerbaijan without preconditions, despite quite strong resistance from the opposition here in the country, and despite also, of course, protests of nationalist forces. But this government is rather pragmatic, because it sees here a possible win-win situation in the medium future. And also the negotiations with Turkey to normalize relations, which would also open possibilities for trade, for transport communications, and Armenia could play a role here as a link between also Turkey and Azerbaijan, and also between Iran. And so it could be a win-win situation for all countries. And so the European Union and the OSCE, of course, is supporting this and encouraging the Armenian government to continue this way. Of course, in this whole context, the Ukrainian war is also an obstacle because now the Minsk group is not anymore perceived as a mediator by the Western co-chairs. That's why the mediation efforts of the Minsk group are suspended for the time being. But there are other tracks which could be used. So this is now the strong involvement of the European Union and of the OSCE chairmanship, and of course direct conflict between the context between the conflicting parties that we encourage. So all this could lead, if there is a positive dynamics, of course, to more investments. So we have here the similar phenomenon like Georgia, like my colleague Mr. Knirsch explained right now from Georgia, that we have here an influx of many Russians, young Russians, many specialists, and among them thousands of IT specialists. So everybody wants to invite IT specialists. I know that they are also invited to Germany, but they find here, we know that they find here also very favorable conditions to continue to work. So Armenia is very liberal. So they have registered already thousands of businesses here, of small and medium businesses from Russian company which moved from Russia. Thousands of accounts were opened at these banks here, and you see many young Russian families here also in the city of Yerevan, and they changed the picture of the city. So this could be a positive, of course, factor for Armenia. Also a rise of tourism from Russia, which could also help the economy as well. So this could be perceived as a positive factors also for future investment climate from Germany. So a strong IT sector and a strong service sector here in Armenia, and encouraging reform policy. I've been invited recently by the Armenian Minister of Economy. I was not the only Western ambassador who was invited. Was also my French colleague, the American colleague, the British colleague, and he's inviting German companies who close their business and production, mainly also production sites in Russia, to come to Armenia, which is quite interesting. And they are willing to assure all necessary conditions to open businesses here. So they say that they would be very welcome. So I just immediately make sure that cannot be a model to bypass sanctions or to deliver goods for the Russian markets from here, which is not possible anymore to do in Russia. But of course, there could be also perspective for a number of German companies here to check Armenia as a business place. And I would like to pass this message also to participants of this forum, that there is such a desire and invitation by the Armenian government. And there seems to be a political commitment to support them here. And we should take them by their word.
Thank you very much. If I may, you allow me to interrupt, having a look on the time. For your introduction, I guess very interesting points from my point of view. Very at least promising movements regarding the relation to Azerbaijan and Turkey. That we see negotiations and, as you call it, a pragmatic approach. I guess that could be very helpful for the region if you see really negotiations just there. Before we start discussion, I would like to include from Chisinau, chargé d'affaires at the German embassy in Chisinau, to share the views on the situation in Moldova. Mr. Kinne, please.
Thank you very much. Moldova has impressed the world with its hospitality and generosity, taking in more than 400,000 refugees from neighboring Ukraine, 100,000 of which stayed in the country. In this country of roughly 2.5 million people, so around 4% of the native population. 90% or so of the refugees are hosted in private homes. This is as if Germans took in 3 million refugees, only that Moldova is the poorest country in Europe with a GDP per capita of 1/7 of Germany's. The cost of catering to all these refugees is estimated at 1 million euros per day, or almost 400 million euros per year, corresponding to more than 2% of GDP. The war in Ukraine came on top of multiple other crises the country has suffered from: the pandemic, an energy crisis, and a captured state. Today, after energy prices quadrupled in a few months, households are spending 50% of their income on energy and 40% on food, on average. As the National Statistics Agency recently revealed, so many cannot even afford these basics anymore. This shows most clearly in my mind the vulnerability and delicacy of Moldova's economic and social situation. Prime Minister Gavrilita rightly said in Berlin recently that never in Moldova's history has its present and future been more at stake than now. The IMF estimates Moldova's external financing needs for this year at more than $1 billion. Moldova's government has identified a financing gap of 400 million that is not covered by existing or planned programs, and of 4.8 billion for the next 3 years. Germany's response has been the Moldova Support Conference on 5th of April in Berlin, initiated by Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock after her visit to Moldova on the 12th of March, and co-hosted by France and Romania. The participants pledged almost 700 million euros to strengthen the country's financial resilience, out of which around 135 million are fresh money, almost 110 million as grants and 530 million as loans, plus 71 million euros in humanitarian assistance, much more than expected, a resounding success. Germany alone pledged 125 million. At the same time, the conference launched the Moldova Support Platform as a follow-up process to ensure consistent and long-term support for the Republic of Moldova. Moldova has a lot going for it. For the first time in its history, a pro-European and reform-oriented government has an absolute parliamentary majority, bringing long-needed political stability to this country. An agricultural net exporter like Moldova is bound to benefit from the expected rise in food prices once producers receive the necessary assistance for inputs like fertilizers, irrigation, and reorientation to new markets. The transportation bottlenecks that became evident as a result of the war will make investments into Moldova's transportation infrastructure, including Giurgiu port, more urgent and economically viable. Ukrainian refugees have already access to the Moldovan labor market and fill important gaps there. The sanctions against Russia might make investors look for alternative locations and destinations from which to reach the Russian-speaking world, as Russian is spoken here as well. Moldova could be one of them. The war in Ukraine has focused international attention on Moldova as the most vulnerable neighboring state. Politically, it has accelerated Moldova's steps towards the EU and better economic integration into the European economic space. Now we have to help Moldova overcome the immediate challenges. If we succeed, the prospects for sustainable long-term economic and social development have never been better. Thank you very much for your attention.
Very much, Mr. Kinne. I will take Ambassador Knirsch to the spotlight as well, and Ambassador Richter, and asking the audience for questions. I saw one in the chat, a question you not really tipped so far, but I just want to ask us a very interesting question, I guess, on the political position of the governments towards the war, or if you can at least reflect the discussion in the country, not in a 10 minutes contribution, but just to give us an understanding how it is perceived in the countries. And maybe we can start with Ambassador Richter. So what is the reflection of the government, and maybe you can drop a word on the mood or the position in the society in Armenia.
Yes, Armenia is in a very difficult situation, so there are strong constraints and very strong pressure from Russia, because Russia is the guarantee power of Armenia and the conflict here with Azerbaijan. So you have Russian troops here in the country, there are Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh, and so Armenia is a member of the CSTO military bloc of Russia. So that's why Armenia has to balance their position, and that's why they do not condemn the aggression. They vote neutrally, so they abstain mainly in the international fora, and this is the best what we can expect from Armenia, because even this is a courageous position they take. Also, if we compare this voting behavior with other CIS countries at the recent vote at the General Assembly on the suspension of Russian membership in the Human Rights Council, so there was a number of CIS countries like Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan that voted against, and Armenia abstained or did not participate, which was for them a critical decision, and they always fear a more Russian pressure. And we see it probably already in Karabakh, where the Russian peacekeepers remain very passive and do not intervene. But at Azeri provocations, and Azeri they occupied some villages there, and Russian peacekeepers didn't act. So for Armenia, it's very, very complicated. Of course, morally they're on our side, and internal discussions they also express their solidarity with Ukraine, but they cannot voice it openly. That's why this neutral position from Armenia.
Thank you very much. And maybe a word on the mood in the population. So could you say something on that?
On the population, we must say that probably there's a majority more in favor of Russia. There was a survey by the US Embassy. They said that, I forgot the numbers, but around 30% support Russia, some more, about also 40% they are neutral, and very, very few support for Ukraine. Maybe this is also due to the fact that Ukraine did not support Armenia, but supported Azerbaijan quite openly during the last war, the 44 days war, 1.5 years ago. So Armenia took side of Azerbaijan. Of course, this was the case of territorial integrity, and this is a little bit here in the minds probably also of the population. So there is more solidarity with Russia.
Thank you very much. So Mr. Knirsch, how is the situation or the position of the Georgian government, and maybe you can tell us, I don't know if there are some surveys among the population towards the conflict.
Yes, well, it's quite a different picture here in Georgia. Georgia has its own long-standing conflict with Russia over the two torn-away regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So Georgians feel very much with Ukraine. There have been massive demonstrations in support of Ukraine, and they go on, and you see a lot of Ukrainian flags all over Georgia and especially Tbilisi. At the same time, the government takes a cautious approach. On one side, they support all the resolutions in the United Nations, the OSCE, the Council of Europe, that are brought forward by the European Union and the United States. Georgia has supported the exclusion of Russia from the Council of Europe and the stopping of activities of the EBRD in Russia. So in the international field, Georgia supports Ukraine 100%. Georgia also takes part in the international sanctions. Importantly, the Georgian national banks makes sure that the Georgian banks do not allow any undercut of sanctions via Georgia, and this is important. The government has been cautious in its pronouncements, and it has made absolutely clear that Georgia will not try to take back its own torn away regions or occupied territories by force, that Georgia is not interested in having its own conflict with Russia. And here there is a sideshow which is unfortunate. There is, as always, a lot of disagreement among the political parties in Georgia. Everybody who has followed events in Georgia knows this. There's a big polarization, and sometimes Ukrainian actors play into this polarization. Some of the members of the former government of President Saakashvili have taken exile in Ukraine years ago. Some of them fulfill important functions. Even the deputy head of the negotiating team of Ukraine in the negotiations with Russia is a Georgian. So they are quite close to the Ukrainian government. And this may be the reason why you often hear very tough and demanding comments of Ukrainian officials towards Georgia. Georgia should do more. Georgia should support Ukraine more strongly. There was even the suggestion of acting in a military way, opening a second front. This is very much part of the overall, the general noise that is associated with the war. And we understand that Ukraine is in a very special situation. But this is superficially, this creates some damage in the Georgian-Ukrainian relationship, which we deplore because both countries are really on the same side and share some of the same issues and dangers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe last but not least, view from Chisinau, Mr. Kinnes. So the government is clearly pro-European, as you described it. So an even much more difficult situation, even when it comes to the geography. So what is the position and how maneuvers the government through this?
Yeah, the government has condemned the war and the Russian aggression on several occasions from the start. Including the atrocities. Moldova aligned itself to the EU statement on the atrocities in Bucha. It supported both the UN General Assembly resolutions and the exclusion of Russia from the Human Rights Council. It did not follow the EU sanctions due to its vulnerabilities and dependencies on Russia in the energy sector, in other sectors, and they have met understanding for this differentiated view in European circles. And they have committed to not allow any circumvention of the EU sanctions. The President herself took a clear stance on this and assured that the banking sector will respect and implement the sanctions, and that she will not allow re-exports, which would have been one possibility to circumvent the sanctions. So we are quite confident that this will happen. Regarding the mood in the population, I've just found the latest poll here by a watchdog relatively respected polling institute supported by EU and others, and also by some German political foundations. So they found that 45% of respondents take the war as an unprovoked and unjustified Russian military aggression. 22% think that it is to defend Donbass, and 15% think that the war is justified to liberate Ukraine from Nazism. The support is especially strong in the Russian-speaking areas. So in the Gagauz region, which has its own language, which is practically Russian-speaking, over 70% of residents support Russia's war against Ukraine, which shows once again the country's vulnerability with regards to economic and energy dependence, but also in terms of its exposure to Russian disinformation, especially among the Russian-speaking population. Even though the government is acting against Russian disinformation much tougher than we do, I would say, when you remember the long story about RT Germany and the fight of the Berlin-Brandenburg media supervising body. Here they called a state of emergency when the war broke out and have already closed more than 10 websites based on an emergency, a state of emergency order. The procedures are quite tough. This danger is very well seen and acted again, but we have had this challenge for a long time, and it's one of the vulnerabilities of this country that Russian disinformation still can enter the country and influence public opinion quite easily. Not to speak about Transnistria, which is to a large extent cut off from the media space of the rest of the country, and is even more exposed to Russian disinformation, even though there the leadership is very prudent and has even banned one pro-Russian demonstration because they are quite concerned about what the war could bring for them if it approaches the borders of Moldova and Transnistria, and have taken a very cautious position. So even there, two strong pro-Russian propaganda is also banned for different reasons. But there, the population is almost completely Russian-speaking, and so the risks and the vulnerabilities there are even stronger.
Thank you very much for this insights. Very useful, and shows that the situation in the countries is very difficult, very different among the countries, but in the countries as well. So that is a very interesting finding. So I would like to thank you three first of all, and looking around here to the audience, if a question is left or not. If it is not the case, again, I would like to thank you. I will take you out of the spotlight and hand over the word to Riccardo Giucci from the German economic team. The German economic team recently did some macroeconomic analysis on the consequences of the war to the three countries. This has been finished yesterday noon. And Riccardo, thank you very much that we have here the opportunity that you presented first time to a public audience. And I guess we can distribute the findings to the participants after our session. But for now, we leaving a bit the political discussion right now and entering the economic one. And Riccardo, please, the floor is yours. And I guess you are sharing the presentation on your own, right?
Yes, thank you, Stefan. And yeah, I will share the presentation. I would like to greet everyone. Happy to be here. As you said, we just finalized this analysis, which has many components. It has a component on exports, on remittances, on tourism, on energy. And what I do now is just a summary of all this research, but the research behind is much wider. And of course, the main issue here, and we can share now the slides. The main issue here is the situation in Russia, because Russia is an important economic partner for all three countries.
Sorry, Riccardo, one interruption. I have to upgrade one of your colleagues to moderator. So whom should I upgrade? So the colleague should be able to share the presentation, and therefore the person needs the role of a speaker here. So whom should I upgrade for this?
Meeting at Berlin Economics.com.
Okay, that's and Gary as well. Okay, just a second.
Yeah.
Just a second. I'm looking for. Okay, you have it already. Okay.
Okay. So starting point is here, of course, the situation in Russia, which has been hit by sanctions. And you see in the next slide that real GDP will drop by 10%. This is quite strong. You see in the chart below, this is the strongest recession in the last 25 years. And this is despite very high oil and gas prices, this must be said. On top comes the depreciation of the Russian ruble, so that in US dollar terms, GDP might drop by even 34%. And of course, much weaker Russia will import much less, will send much less remittances to other countries. Russians will spend much less money on tourism. Yeah, so these are all the effects they have, and of course we analyze country by country what it means for them, and the results actually are quite different in the countries. And we start with Moldova, and Moldova actually does not export a lot to Russia, but of course the transit route to Russia is now cut because most exports go through Ukraine, and you cannot now transport goods through Ukraine. So that's why they have a quite important drop of 1.6% of GDP. That's quite a lot. And this is mainly about apples. Half of the decline regards to apples, which are only exported to Russia. And it's about medicaments also. So that's the export side. The remittances are an important issue, and we have estimated, based on experience in other times, especially in the crisis 2015, we look what happened then to remittances also, and so we can forecast that remittances will decline by 1% of GDP. Yeah, so Mr. Kinney was referring to the balance of payment gap, and these are the components of this balance of payment gap. So the export drop, remittances, and on top, Moldova faces much higher energy prices. This is a worldwide effect. So oil has increased, gas prices are much higher, and this is a further shock of 3.5% of GDP. So we have lower exports, lower remittances, and higher imports. So a threefold shock. This will translate into problems to inflation, which were already very high. So a very difficult situation. And on top comes the refugees from Ukraine, which are highly welcome. But of course, they cost money. And this means that the budget deficit will increase to 7.5% of GDP. So as we see here, multiple shocks to the country and clear case for international support, which has been forthcoming. Now let's move to Georgia. This is a quite different situation because Georgia has no problem exporting now. The transit route to Russia is not blocked, so export can continue. And also, Georgia can export some things that Western countries used to export, like French wine, Spanish wine, or so on, could be exported, so they can substitute for Russian imports of Western goods. And that's why we think that the shock on goods exports will not be very strong. It will be only 0.4% of GDP. So it's much, much less than in Moldova. Tourism is not clear. Of course, the traditional tourists might be less, but we have, as was mentioned, these IT experts, but other people also, which move from Russia to Tbilisi and other cities of Georgia. And these people count statistically as tourists because they're working in Georgia, but they're working for other countries, and they're staying in hotels, they're going to restaurants, so they behave like tourists, of course, and economically speaking, for the moment at least, they are tourists and are also registered as tourists. And that's why it's not clear what will happen with tourism. It could go up or down, it's not clear, very difficult to forecast. Remittances, this is similar as in Moldova, 1% of GDP less. But the biggest impact on Georgia, and that was also mentioned by the ambassador, is actually oil prices, oil imports, additional cost of 2.1% of GDP, which means, of course, a problem for inflation, yeah, because energy prices are very important for inflation, and if they increase, and they have increased a lot, they fueled inflation and limit the possibility of the National Bank to support the economy in the difficult situation. So in total, if you compare this to Moldova, you see a much, much weaker shock. And the crucial factor here has been oil prices and to some extent remittances. Now let's move to Armenia. And Armenia is actually very strongly linked to Russia. I mean, they are both members in the Eurasian Economic Union. Armenia has problems also with neighbors, and they don't have any direct links to trade with Azerbaijan. So Russia is a very important market. And that's why we expect here a decline, which is quite strong, 1.8% of GDP decline in exports. And this is mainly because of brandy. You know, the famous Ararat and Noi brands, they will go down, that's for sure. But other agri-food products will also go down because they are very much oriented towards Russia. The second big shock is remittances. There are lots of Armenians working in Russia or seasonal workers, very much, a lot of people, and this will decline strongly. And we expect thus for the year, not now, but for the year, a decline of 2.8% of GDP. That's really almost 3 times bigger than for Georgia and for Moldova. A very strong shock. Tourism here, we expect even a positive impact because of the influx of high-skilled Russians. And again, entrepreneurs, IT people, and so on. And that's why this is a positive impact, likely. Very interesting for Armenia, almost no impact on the energy sector. Yeah, that's an exemption. We saw for Georgia, the main impact was energy. For Moldova, a huge impact energy. No impact in Armenia. Why not? Because they buy Russian oil, Ural, and the price of Ural is not that high. There is a discount of about 30% compared to Brent. So the prices for Russian oil has not increased that much. And the gas contract with Gazprom covers the full year. So for them, there is no issue of energy security and no issue of energy prices. That's a great advantage in Armenia compared to the other countries. And consequently, no major impact on inflation. That's a good side. Budget deficit, we will see. I think we are quite worried that, of course, the situation in Russia, not just economically, but politically also, it will deteriorate. The developments are very negative. And this will mean that lots of Armenians or ethnic Armenians living in Russia will leave the country and go back to Armenia to feel safe. And that means, of course, there will not be the very rich or quite wealthy IT people. We're talking about normal people with less income, which might need support. And so we think that there might be a need for budgetary support for people emigrating from Russia in the third quarter or so. Now, let me just compare the 3 countries in this table. And I think the effect on GDP makes clear the relationship between the 3 countries. In Moldova, we have a threefold shock: exports, remittances, and energy prices on the balance of payments. And that's why GDP will decline by, I mean, the shock, not a recession, the shock will be 4.2 percentage points reduction of GDP, a very strong reduction. In Armenia, exports also are hit, remittances also very strong, but not the energy prices. And that's why the effect on Armenia is less strong than in Moldova. Here, the effect is 3.7 percentage point. Still very strong, but not as big as in Moldova. In Georgia, the only effect, strong effect, regards energy prices with some remittances, but not that strong. And that's why here it's only 1.5 percentage points shock to GDP. So very different dimensions of the shock. Also inflation, different story, huge problem for Moldova, significant problem for Georgia, and practically no problem for Armenia. And also fiscally, a completely different story because of refugees in Moldova, high problems, not many problems in Georgia, and eventually problems in Armenia if there is a massive immigration from Russia. And from that, we deduce, of course, the need for international support, a huge need for Moldova, some need for Armenia, and we see not much need for support in Georgia at the moment, at least. Now, let me finish with the outlook for this year. Moldova will practically not grow economically this year. We forecast 0.3% growth, is practically zero, with an inflation of over 20%. So that's a pretty unfavorable combination of factors. So we call it stagflation, and that's not a very nice situation. On top, huge budget deficit, a very difficult year for the country. And on Georgia, the prospects are still positive. I mean, 3.5% growth. That's not bad. It's not what it was supposed to be, 5%, but still 3.5 is quite good. And so not really shock. The shock is not really that strong. And Armenia, we expect growth to be at about 1.6%. So it's a modest growth, but positive growth. And the problems will come most likely in the third and fourth quarter if the developments in Russia continue as they are now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for this timely research you did, and thank you very much that you presented it in the framework of our session today. I take the colleagues from the business associations in the countries to our panel. Miri Navasadyan from Yerevan, Thomas Kimmelswenger from Tbilisi, both the managing directors of the German business associations there, and Franz Anton Plitt, the president of the German-speaking business association in Moldova. Thank you very much that you joined our session. And I would like to pass the word to you. Maybe we start with ladies first, with Miri from Yerevan, giving us an understanding on how companies see the situation and how the effects are on the companies in Yerevan, and maybe if you don't mind to give some comments on the findings that Ricardo Giucci presented, if you can reflect this and how it will have effects on the companies. So maybe you have a contribution of 3 to 5 minutes so that the others can step in and we can take questions from the audience. So Miri, please.
Thank you, Stefan. I would like also to greet everyone and to say thank you, the organizers, for this possibility, for this opportunity. And I want to thank many aspects I have already discussed and presented now. And of course, we will have to talk about them further and more, because first, the lives and fates of people from both sides are important. And the economic situations is also important. The economics, of course, it's important, but I want to speak also about the lives and fates of people who are living in these countries. And it's obvious how hard Russian-Ukrainian conflict has affected the former Soviet countries, and the economic dependence on Russia has greatly affected our economy in many sectors. As already mentioned from Mr. Dr. Giucci, brandy export in terms of price and consumptions has been strongly influenced. And the decrease in exports will inevitably lead to stagnation of the brandy industry in Armenia and have a serious impact on Armenian viticulture. Another important issue and another important problem, I would say, is remittances from Russia. Most remittances come from seasonal migrants working in Russia. And as also presented from German economic team, remittances from Russia likely be dropped by 2.8% of GDP. And I wanted to mention one point. Also, the companies with Russian capital in Armenia also belong to the group of potential risks. The latter is presented in the energy, telecommunications, and mining sectors. And these companies create thousands of jobs and contribute a significant part to the tax revenues of Armenia. And also most direct investment in Armenia come from Russia, and the conflict might affect decisions of foreign investments here. When we talk about influx into Armenia, it should be noted about some negative side effects. Real estate rent problems, I think in other countries also, in Georgia and in Moldova also have been registered for Armenians since February, March. And as the sharp rise in rental prices due to improper contracts has led to citizens found themselves outside because they couldn't afford to pay their rent. In front of guest houses and hotels, they registered an increase, and the income doubled compared to those months of the previous year. If we talk about IT sector and IT specialists coming to Armenia, they here have the positive impact. As besides, if until now Armenia had a hard time attracting the best IT specialists in the same field, for example, in the field of artificial intelligence, now they have come, I can say, on their own way, let us say, and to express also their willingness to cooperate with Armenian companies, which will certainly be, as I think, a stimulus for the development, for further development of this field in Armenia. As Mr. Ambassador Richter mentioned, there are more than about 100 companies have already opened their branches in Armenia, and thousands highly qualified specialists have been included in the work of Armenian IT companies. And it is very good signs to our economy, to our companies who are working here now, and for the further cooperation with IT sector in Armenia. Yeah, that's from my side.
Thank you very much, Mary. So for this first insight, so of course exports are affected very hardly and badly, but due to the fact that people are coming and specialists are coming very often, so the companies might benefit as well in another sector. So maybe I would like to hand over the word to Franz Anton Plitt from Moldova, president of the German-speaking Business Association in Moldova and IT entrepreneur. So maybe you can take up this topic. Is Moldova benefiting from this influx of qualified people as well?
Yeah, Stefan Kegebein, thank you very much for handing over the floor to me and making this exact right introduction. That is the question for us as a business association, not only to be shocked and remain in this situation of shock, but to see what is happening now. How is the influence for the main parts of our local businesses in the main, well, in short term as well as in middle term. About the short-term effects, effectively, Mr. Giucci has expressed correctly how the influence is. Maybe he did not make clear that we might have in the short time perhaps also an option here to gain some. Well, and that sounds a little bit hard, as of course we all condemn this attack, and the situation is terrible for the people. But there is of course some way an advantage in these refugees if we could do something sensible with them in Moldova, where I think it might be sensible, thought more internationally, to keep the people here instead of sending most of them to Central Europe, as I think they are better accommodated in Moldova, and they could repopulate, at least for some time, the mostly empty villages. And it is definitely cheaper to accommodate them in Moldova than in Germany or Austria or wherever. Of course, the condition for that would be that the West pays, what makes, from my point of view, a lot of sense. That is about the short-term options. It is a pity that we do not gain that much talent as it seems to happen in Georgia. So our envy to Georgia in this regard is, well, we get Ukrainian women, not that women would be less able to work, but most of them will go back to their husbands and friends once the war is over. And the while they are busy enough with taking care of their children or their parents. And we do not get these Russian IT people, what obviously go to Armenia, though that is a pity. We would, of course, welcome these people as well, but we don't have a border with Russia. So we get a very different kind of people. Mostly untouched in, as far as we can see it here, is the field of IT, as well. There is no problem with delivering it, and the demand for IT services is as high as it was before, and maybe the IT already has some advantages, as of course also services offered in the past from Russian and partly from Ukrainian entrepreneurs are not available or not appreciated that much at the moment. Nevertheless, for the moment, the impact is of course very, very bad. But let me quote here Winston Churchill: "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And that is without forgetting the poor people and the tragedy, what happens next door. That is something what we have nevertheless to do. If something terrible happens, but it has some options, then you have to grasp them nevertheless. And that is one of the tasks for both politicians and more so entrepreneurs. So the European Union opens its doors. That is most likely at least a good thing, even for Moldova. We see that we have this terrible development in agricultural products, the prices, but of course that's good for Moldova. Moldova has very good conditions in agriculture, and agriculture is at the heart of the nation. Most people think still that agriculture is an important field of business. It has another place in the policy of the last governments as well as the current. I think I don't know that much about the current yet because they are not that long in charge, but that might be an option to improve the lot of mainly the countryside, as the conditions are good, the people have a heart for it, and of course, there were not many people choosing this way for their professional development in the future in the last years. We from the MDW addressed that issue already in the last month, and we were just about to start a project to get more qualified people interested in the field of agriculture again with GIZ. Should start on the 1st of March. Well, okay, that was cancelled for the moment, but we think that is an option for Moldova. Another thing is that sun energy has, of course, also good conditions, and we see we have to get less dependent from mainly Russian, but I would say in general from imported energy, because now it's Russia. But do we know what happens in the Gulf area in the future? There might also come strange things. If you ask me, it looks a little bit strange for me in the light of a feminist foreign policy as it was published and mentioned by our new government, that our Minister for Economy goes to the bosses of the Arabian Gulf states, where the rights of women are surely even less developed than in Russia, to ask them to not use the word begging for increasing their production. So that is surely something what makes a lot of sense at the moment, but it's definitely not something what should be in our long-lasting interest. And therefore, I think we should try what we can in Europe and in other countries to get less dependent on that. So sun energy is an option for us. Of course, IT will gain in importance as well. But what we would like to get back what we lost for the moment in Moldova, where we see a permanent advantage of Moldova, to get this bridge function between the European, Eurasian or Eurasian Economic Union with Russia as a main part, and the West, that we lost for the moment for sure. I dare to utter here a few words what might not be very popular at the moment, but we see all what terrible comes from this Russian current policy, yes. But this war proves also two things what we should have in mind for our long-lasting plans. First, obviously, Russian soldiers are very bad. They are very, they are performing very bad, seen from Putin's eyes, in attacking another country. Even we have these atrocities. Whoever did them, that were probably a significant amount of people, but we hear also all these rumors about mutinies.
One request: could you just finish in a minute so that we can hand over to Thomas
Okay,
Kimmelsing
good.
as well?
So there will be Russian people. We should not exclude them. From my point of view, we should, on the long run, offer the opposition in Russia that Russia can take part in the European family, and then on the long run we will really have solved all these issues. And only with that, we cannot do that with Putin anymore. That's clear. But offer that to them, and earlier or later we will have to deal with Russia and the Russian population, and then Moldova will be again in its central bridge function, and that is what we hope for.
Thank you very much for this contribution. So last but not least, Thomas Kimmelswenger. So we heard about IT and agriculture, tourism topics as well. So what is your perception? What do you hear from your membership, from the Georgian companies, how they feel impacted negatively or positively? So what is the situation on the ground in the companies in Tiflis?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'll keep it strictly economic. So far, the mood in Georgia is quite split. Of course, we are not happy with the situation in Russia, as we have our own history with this country. So there is lots of fear within the community that we might be next. And some European governments keep definitely pointing in this direction to give us the right impression we might really be next. On the other side, of course, this crisis brings some opportunities as well, which already showed the government or the people here in Georgia, even that you have an opportunity, you are still not ready to take the opportunity. As Mr. Ambassador Knirsch mentioned already, yes, we could take over some of the transportation from the northern route, but if we do so, we immediately see we have not the capacity to take over 1% of the northern route. We mainly have multimodal transportation here in the country. We go from sea to sea, via mountains. We change from railway to ship, from ship to truck, from truck to ship, which makes it quite expensive for everything. What we have seen lately with the members that we have an energy problem here for production. One of our biggest members, for instance, is Heidelberg Cement, and they depend a lot on coal from Russia. So now we have to get it somewhere else, and this is definitely not the right time to get it from somewhere else, and also it needs to be transported. To show how the situation within the country is, yes, Russia is our northern neighbor. We have problems with our neighbors, but still the Russians are the biggest group of tourists that are normally coming to us. And we have seen within the last couple of weeks approximately 35,000 Russians coming into the country, most of them renting flats, majority of them already left again. What is left here in the country is mainly people what we see on the street, the age group of 18 to, I would say, 30, 35. We don't know how well equipped they are or what their plan is. They open up a lot of companies, which makes it easy here in Georgia, but we do not know yet how successful or how big this company will be or if they will be operational at all. This influx of Russian so-called tourists definitely led to a strengthening of the Georgian lari, of our local currency, which was nicely welcomed by production companies here in Georgia. But we all know this might not take that long, where we see the lari depreciating again. What else can I say? We have contact to all the three countries that are creating trouble right now: Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. We have companies from all three countries who want to come to our side and set up their companies here. As such, of course, we have this bit of a problem that we sort of welcome this conflict. Let me be blunt on this, because the longer the conflict takes, the more sense it makes for those companies to leave their home countries and come to Georgia. If we hope for a quick ending of this conflict, I'm pretty sure everybody will go back Russia, everybody will go back Ukraine, and nothing will change over the long run because the markets are way too big to just let them left behind. As such, yes, we try to see the positive side on the whole situation, but knowing the history that we have with Russia, of course, there is plenty of anxiety over here, especially right mentioned from the start when we have governments out of Europe asking for a second front to be opened, which then of course could be us, or the UK government pushing heavily for weaponizing the Georgian army, or making it well known in the media that everybody supposes we are the next country to be taken over by the Russians. So far, we don't see it. We have our problems, but so far we can still say the opportunities to do business here in Georgia are definitely outweighing the risk that we see right now with our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So a very uncertain situation. And if I would ask a final question with regards to the future, I guess it would be hard for everyone to answer it, since no one knows if everything stops in a week. Predictions would be different when it takes months of this war in Ukraine. So I'm looking to the audience. So thank you very much for the first opinions. So I'm looking to the audience and would like to open the floor to the participants to raise their digital hand to ask a question live or to write it to the chat. So please, the floor will be open now for questions. If someone wants to. If not, as I can see, no one is raising their hand so far. Okay, Dirk Rönnecke typed in a question. Many thanks to all interesting. So I have to read it. No, he has to leave. So, Mr. Plitt, please, you raised your hand.
Yes, I did. Thank you. As nobody else is asking here questions, and I have there a point to discuss with my colleagues as well as the ambassadors. What I see when I look into the map of the languages and the nations in all this area, what has now these troubles, I see that wherever you will redraw or not redraw the borders, you will still have issues and problems. I see that the European Union is very generous in opened their doors. It came to my mind, why or what do we have to offer to the Russian opposition, and what do we have to offer to finally solve these things on the long run? And I ask here my colleagues, would it be really a settlement if not only Ukraine and Georgia and Armenia, but also Russia and Belarus, would some way be integrated in a European Union's economic area, being full member of it or not in the long run? As so far I see only that I mean, we have these issues with the borders around Germany, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, by the way, as well. And they were settled in the European Union with open borders, with the Schengen area. Nobody is unhappy with that anymore. Everybody can live perfectly fine with how it is now. Is that not the only real solution? Would that work from the Georgian and Armenian government?
Maybe I can combine your remarks with the question I had in mind, and then we can open the floor for those who would like to take this question. I would be interested, Ricardo and Thomas and Miri and the others, how the companies, or from a macroeconomic perspective and from a business-oriented perspective, how do you assess the approaches or the reactions of the government when it comes to serving the needs of the companies in the last 6-7 weeks? Are you somehow, let's say, satisfied from a point of macroeconomic analysis, from a point of business orientation, or not? Maybe you can take my question and the question from Mr. Plitt as well. Maybe that's more a political one, and Ambassador Richter can take it as well. Mr. Kinne left, I saw. But for this, I would like to open the floor, and who else feel addressed and take the floor, please.
But if I could first,
Ricardo raised the hand.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think the macroeconomic response had to be appropriate. Of course, these countries work with the IMF very tightly, and the IMF has very quickly reacted to that, having new programs, additional money for Moldova. For example, the mission chief was in Berlin at the conference that took place in the Foreign Office here in Berlin. So there is a macroeconomic response. And one thing is clear, there is nothing that the central bank can do at the moment, because inflation is very high. And when inflation is high, you have to combat inflation. You cannot support the economy. So it's clear that the need here is for a fiscal response in Moldova, but also partly in Armenia. And this fiscal response needs the support of international partners. And so I think that in general, the macroeconomic handling of the situation has been appropriate. And yeah, we have been involved in that. And I think it's no critique at all at the moment regarding that. Of course, you have to see what happens to the debt, because you get credits and so on, and then the debt goes up. And then it's the question of debt sustainability. This is something we have to think about. That's why grants are also a solution, not just debt.
Thank you very much. Thomas, Miri?
Mary, you want to go first?
Okay, Thomas, you have to.
Okay. Well, I could say for the last couple of weeks, the support of the local government definitely was good enough to keep the economy going and to help the companies to get all the support they need to get their means going to keep the economy running. Of course, it's not easy, and everybody needs to work together. And I'm 100% sure you will find plenty of people who definitely disagree with what I just said. On the political side, well, this is a very good idea, and we discussed it a couple of years ago. Wouldn't it be fun if everybody would be part of the European Union? Plenty of problems would be solved, except for the part of Catalans. I think they still have a problem with this situation. I think it's a bit too philosophical. If we now think about bringing Russia and Georgia within the European Union, this would be nice. Maybe there would have been a chance 20 years ago. But right now, I don't see this chance, and I don't see the willingness of any side to make this happen.
Well, if I might say something about that, I'm not on mute, yeah?
You can hear you, yeah.
Okay, fine. So first, I do not see it mainly as a political, but also as an economical, most important question. How we can solve this issue and get at the same time the best economic situation. And as I already said, I do not see any option to do that with the current government in Russia. But I think that we should offer, or we could offer that to the opposition, even if at the moment the official rates of agreement with Mr. Putin are pretty high, but that might change at any time soon. So I'm not that pessimistic. This mood might change soon, and only that would really bring peace, and with that, the best situation for the economies. It's my opinion.
Thanks a lot. So, yeah, I don't know.
A question to Ambassador
maybe
Kinner.
please introduce you shortly who you are, where you're from in one sentence, and then the question.
Herbert Job, senior partner of a German-based consulting company with projects in Moldova. A question to Ambassador Kinner. How do you evaluate the chances of Moldova?
He left. I guess Mr. Kinner left already. But maybe address your question anyhow. Maybe somebody else can take it.
Yes. What are the chances of Moldova to join the European community?
So you're referring to the application Moldova submitted, I guess.
To the application process and to the finalization of the becoming a member, because there's a strong wish, as I perceive it, in Moldova, to sort of to copy the Romanian model.
Shall I say something about that after Mr. Kinner is not available?
Feel free to. I guess we have some colleagues from the European External Action Service in the line as well. Maybe someone feels ready for a comment as well. But yeah, please take it. Mr. Plitt.
Okay. Well, there are two ways, Mr. Job, and nice to see you again, and hope to meet you soon again in Moldova. We met there some last
yes,
summer.
A couple of beers we had. Yes.
So, well, there are two ways for Moldova to join the European Union. The one way is the usual one, and there we have, in both cases, we have the issue with the more Russian-orientated areas of Transnistria and of Gagauzia. The one way, the classical way, and recently there were the mood seems to change that perhaps we should let the Transnistrian area go, as effectively Transnistria did not belong to the historical Moldovan area or fiefdom of Stefan the Great, Stefan cel Mare, and therefore having easier access to join the European Union as an independent country. The Gagauzians would have to make up their minds whether they would come with us or not. It does not really matter, as it's not such a big region, and probably they would. The other way, what was out of discussion the last year since I'm active there, but seems to get now a point of to become now a point of discussion again, would be the East German way, simply joining Romania, making a unification with Romania. I thought it was completely off the table, and I do not really think that it is in the very best interest of the government of or the Moldovan people, but I have not to make this decision. It's only a fact that it comes again somehow on the table. So if you ask me personally, I think within the next 5 years or 10 years, Moldova will be part of the European Union in the light of the current development, but most likely without Transnistria. Once they have decided to let the Transnistria go wherever, I think that will go very quickly.
I guess, thank you very much for the answer.
Thank you.
And maybe Ambassador Richter, since you are the from the ambassadors, the last one in the round, I will pass or will ask you to for final remarks and closing the session in a minute. I guess regarding Moldova and the European Union, it's indeed a very difficult question, I guess. And I guess the most important issue will be this geographical question. You mentioned Transnistria. Unless this factor or this situation isn't solved, I guess everything else could be prepared. But from my point of view, European Union would never invite a country with open borders or with open questions regarding borders to the Union. So I guess that's the most critical issue, I guess. Mr. Ambassador Richter, So you are the last one representing the federal government here in the round. So that's why the honor for the last words belongs to you. Thank you very much for the economic panel, Ricardo Giucci, Thomas Kimmelswenger, Miri Navasadian, and Franz Anton Blitt to Berlin, Yerevan, Tbilisi, and Chisinau. And now I'm handing over to Mr. Richter. I hope it's fine with you to give some final remarks.
Yeah, regarding the European perspective, so I would like to speak a little bit for Armenia. I have the impression that Armenia is very much interested in further strengthening the European partnership, the Eastern Partnership, which is so the perfect model for approaching these countries to the European Union at this stage, at least before the war. And for speaking for Armenia, there was a certain concern here whether the European partnership will still continue to live, given the applications of Ukraine and then also Georgia and Moldova. I would say it's very much important now to indicate to these countries that the European Union is strengthening the Eastern Partnership as well, and this is a mechanism that brings these countries closer to Europe. The current situation. So Armenia didn't manage to conclude this association agreement with the EU around how many years ago? This was 2013, I think. This was before the Maidan, because there was a strong resistance from Russia. Of course, it was a desire of Armenia, but it was realistically not possible. Now we have this very extended cooperation agreement, SEPA, and this is what is possible realistically at this moment. Yeah. Of course, in the long run, it would be ideal world if Russia would be democratic and would be also interested to cooperate closer with the European Union. But therefore, there have to be big changes in Russia itself. And I don't think that we can speak about this right now. So many things will change, and we will see. But we should do what is realistic now, and this is the Eastern Partnership. This is my opinion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. So I see that Ambassador Knirsch is still with us. Sorry for not mentioning you, but of course, please feel free to add remarks, to add final remarks as well. So please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kegebein, and interesting that we are coming to such political and highly strategic questions at the end of our meeting. Of course, I couldn't agree more with Viktor Richter. Change in Russia in the way he described is highly desirable, but also not very likely at this moment. My main point would be that we now know what a good time we had in the last 30 years. This was a time of very positive, not only political, but also economic and business development in all of Europe, and especially in Eastern Europe. And there were no losers to this development. Russia definitely profited from it, and the current conflict does not have roots in any economic interests or business interests, but in a very different world of thinking, where, as I have often heard in Russia, Russia cannot be part of the West. This is a deep conviction of many people, but it is a conviction that they have not really thought much about or reflected. It's a question of identity rather than interests. We should do the best we can to keep the European economy and economic linkages between countries strong and resilient, even during this crisis, during this war. And when it ends or when it abates, do our best to improve them and to make them even stronger. And so it's a good thing that Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia have expressed their interest to join the European Union. They have received the so-called questionnaire from the European Commission just in the last couple of days. For Georgia, it was yesterday. and we are hoping for quick and expedient work so that the countries could be granted candidate status, perhaps in the near future. This would be a good way of encouraging their own efforts to undertake the necessary reforms that they need to do in order to be competitive and successful members of the European Union one day.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Knirsch. I guess it was a very, very good final remark.
And please, to all participants, if you have questions, concrete questions about business in Georgia, and I'm sure that also goes for Armenia and Moldova, you can turn to the business organizations and to the embassies in these countries directly. We are always there and always happy to assist you.
Thank you very much. This was my question, my sentence I had right now on my desk, so I can make a green tick to the box, and would like to thank you, Ambassador Richter, Ambassador Knirsch, for your contributions. Mr. Kinne, who has already left the round, and of course Riccardo Giucci from German economic team. We will contribute the analysis you did among the participants of today's session. And of course, a big thank you to Mirina Vassadian, Thomas Kimmelswenger, and Franz Anton Plitt for the insights, how companies in the countries sees it. So of course, we will cover the developments in the region for the next weeks and months as well. And let's see if it is, if we can set up a similar event in the next months with a more positive outlook or against a more positive background. I guess we all hope that. Having said this, thank you very much to all participants, to all speakers, and sending greetings to all the cities where you are at the moment. And stay safe and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wiedersehen. Tschüss.
Tschüss.
Ja, arrivedere.